Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take stacks of high-grade research and distill the critical intelligence you need to be truly well-informed. Today, we're actually traveling back in time, back to the first few really critical months of the pandemic.
hmm
Because before all the mask mandates, before the vaccines, there was this crucial moment when scientists realized that our initial understanding of how SARS-CoV-2 spread was fundamentally wrong.
Dangerously wrong, really.
Exactly. And today, we are diving into the source material that helped correct the record.
Our source for this deep dive is it's a extremely high-impact piece of virology. It was published in Nature back in April of 2020,
So really early.
incredibly early, and it detailed the virological assessment of 9 hospitalized COVID-19 patients in Munich, Germany. This was some of the first raw, detailed data we had.
And the mission here is, I think, so important for anyone who wants to understand how all of this unfolded. You want to know the key difference between this new virus and its cousin, SARS-CoV from
Yeah.
2003. We need to understand where SARS-CoV-2 actively replicates, when you're most infectious, and, what that timing means for why this thing was just so much harder to contain.
And it's important to stress the quality of this study's cohort. All 9 patients were young to middle-aged professionals.
So not the most severe cases we'd see later on.
Not at all. They all had comparatively mild clinical courses, and crucially, they were all linked. The researchers know how they got infected, which avoids the usual bias of just studying the sickest people who show up late to the hospital.
Oh, they ruled out everything else right. No flu, no common colds.
That's right. No co-infections. This was a clean, pure look at how SARS-CoV-2 behaves right at the start. It's exactly what you need to see how the virus, establishes its first beachhead.
Okay, so let's jump right into the central finding, because this, for me, this is the scientific pivot point for the whole early pandemic response.
It really is.
With the 2003 SARS virus, SARS-CoV, everyone thought of it as a lower respiratory tract infection. It went deep into the lungs.
Right, because that's where its target receptor, ACE2, was most heavily expressed. And that deep lung preference actually, it created a kind of biological speed bump for containment.
A speed bump. How so?
Well, with the first SARS, people only became really infectious after they were already profoundly sick. They were usually in the hospital coughing up sputum from their lungs.
You could see the danger coming.
You could, but SARS-CoV-2 it completely bypassed that speed bump. What did this Munich study prove about where the new virus was setting up shop?
It provided clear physical proof of active virus replication in the tissues of the upper respiratory tract.
So the throat, the nose.
Exactly, the throat and the nasal pharynx. This just fundamentally redrew the map of the disease. The virus had a staging ground right where the air flows in and out.
And the amount of virus they found there was it's hard to overstate.
Yeah, let's really pause on that number, because this is the aha moment for understanding why this thing moves so fast.
So the data showed that pharyngeal or throat viral shedding was extremely high, and it peaked really early, around day 4 of symptoms.
Day 4.
And that peak viral load hit an average of 7.11 times 10 to the 8th RNA copies per throat swab.
Okay, wait, I need to put that in context for everyone listening. How does that compare to the original SARS?
It's more than 1,000 times higher.
1,000?
1,000 times higher than the peak concentrations we saw with SARS-CoV in 2003. And the timing difference is just as critical.
Right.
SARS-CoV took 7 to 10 days after you felt sick to even reach its much, much lower peak.
Yeah.
SARS-CoV-2 was hitting this super peak by day 4, when patients were, just barely feeling unwell.
So it's the difference between a slow, contained house fire and just an immediate flash flood.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
But the challenge for the researchers was proving this was actual replication, a virus factory in the throat,
Yeah.
and not just junk coughed up from the lungs.
Right. How did they prove the throat was the factory?
They looked for something called viral subgenomic mRNAs.
Okay, break that down for us.
So think of the main viral RNA as the complete blueprint for a house. The subgenomic mRNAs are like the specific instruction sheets for the construction crew on site.
Like build a wall here, install a window there.
Precisely. Those instructions are only being read and used inside an infected cell. They don't get packaged into the finished virus particle that gets shed.
So if you find the construction crew's instructions?
You know there's a factory running right there. And they found these subgenomic mRNAs in throat swabs during the first 5 days. It was confirmation of localized active replication.
And then there was that genetic evidence from patient number 4. The single nucleotide smoking gun, this really locked it in, didn't it?
Oh, it did. It's one of those elegant pieces of evidence in the whole paper. They found a sequence-distinct virus population,
Meaning?
meaning a specific genetic mutation, just a tiny one, in the virus from the throat swab that was different from the virus in that same patient's sputum sample
And these were taken on the same day.
on the very same day.
So why does that tiny little difference matter so much?
Because if the virus in the throat was just spillover from the lung, it should have been genetically identical. The fact that the throat virus had its own little mutation proves the two populations were replicating independently.
Wow.
The throat wasn't just a hallway for the virus, it was its own thriving city.
And the patient's symptoms back this up, the loss of taste and smell.
Yes, exactly. 4 of the 9 patients reported that. And they noted it was stronger, more profound, and longer lasting than what you'd get with a common cold.
Ugh.
It all pointed to the upper respiratory tissues being directly infected.
So what was the secret? What gave this virus the key to unlock the throat, a place its cousin couldn't really colonize?
Well, the hypothesis, which this paper touches on, points to a tiny structural difference in the spike protein.
Okay.
SARS-CoV-2 has something called a polybasic furin-type cleavage site. It's a feature that's absent in the original SARS-CoV.
And this furin site acts like a master key.
That's the idea. It's thought to allow the virus to gain entry into tissues like the throat, which might have fewer of those ACE2 receptors than the deep lung. A tiny, microscopic change that completely altered the course of the pandemic.
So once we understand the geography, the next piece is the timing. We need to look at those viral load kinetics to figure out the true window of infectivity.
Exactly. And when you look at the concentration curves, the swab data versus the sputum data, they tell a really interesting story about the timeline.
What did they see?
The data showed that the viral RNA concentration in the throat swabs, it was actually already declining by the time these patients first came to the hospital.
So by the time a person thinks, maybe I should get tested, they're already past their peak shedding point in their throat.
That's it, precisely. They've likely already been spreading it at maximum capacity.
And what about the sputum, the samples from the lungs?
In contrast, the viral RNA in the sputum declined much more slowly. And in the 2 patients who developed some minor signs of lung involvement, the sputum viral loads actually had a noticeable second peak around day 10 or 11.
Which suggests that lung involvement might mean you're infectious for longer, but later in the illness.
It could, yes. But as you said, the crucial distinction isn't just counting RNA copies. That can be just genetic debris. The real question for public health is whether the virus is live.
Can it actually infect another person? What did the live virus isolation attempts show?
This is maybe the most important finding in the paper for hospital policy. They found that infectious live virus was readily isolated from both throat and sputum samples during the first week of symptoms.
That gun was loaded.
Absolutely. Gun was loaded.
So when did it become unloaded? When was the virus no longer live?
This was the critical finding. No isolates were obtained from any sample taken after day 8.
None at all.
None. Even though the PCR tests were still lighting up, showing high RNA loads. Day 8 was the clear line in the sand between being actively infectious and just shedding leftover, non-infectious viral parts.
So the real danger window is tight. It's basically that first week.
A little over a week, yes. Regardless of how long you might test positive, they even found a specific viral load threshold.
Oh, that's useful.
It was. They established that any sample containing less than 10 to the 6th or 1,000,000 RNA copies per milliliter never yielded a viable live virus.
So that number gave them a measurable proxy for infectiousness. That is powerful data for hospitals trying to manage beds.
It's hugely powerful. They actually used this data using a statistical method called probit modeling to calculate the risk for an early discharge.
They wanted to know the odds that a patient could still infect someone after going home.
Exactly. And they came up with some very clear evidence-based criteria.
But were they?
To keep the residual infectivity risk below 5%, their model suggested a patient should be beyond day 10 of symptoms and have a viral RNA load of less than 100,000 copies per milliliter of sputum. It was a roadmap for safely clearing beds.
An evidence-based pathway. That's incredible for so early in the pandemic.
It was foundational.
Okay, so we've established the respiratory tract dynamic. Let's broaden out. Did the virus break out and go systemic in these mild cases?
In these 9 mild cases, the answer was actually very reassuring. The infection seemed to stay localized.
Meaning?
Neither blood nor urine samples ever tested positive for SARS-CoV-2 RNA.
So no detectable virus in the bloodstream, at least not in this mild cohort. But what about the GI tract, the stool samples? That was a different story, wasn't it?
It was. They consistently found high concentrations of viral RNA
Mm.
in stool samples. And they even found those subgenomic mRNAs again, the active construction crew.
So that strongly suggests active replication is happening in the gut.
It does, very much like the original SARS virus.
But, and here's the mystery, the big contradiction they uncovered. Did they ever manage to grow a live virus from the stool?
Never. Virus isolation from stool was unsuccessful in every single attempt.
Even with high RNA counts and evidence of replication?
Even then. And that is a massive public health finding.
Why do you think that is? Is the gut just too harsh an environment?
That's the leading hypothesis, that the acidity, the digestive enzymes, they just render the virus non-infectious almost immediately after it's shed from the intestinal cells.
So the practical take-home here is huge. It means containment efforts should really focus on droplet transmission breathing, talking, and not worry as much about, say, surfaces contaminated by GI shedding.
Exactly right. It helped prioritize public health efforts right where they mattered most.
Okay, so let's pivot to the body's defense system. When did the immune clock start ticking? How quickly did these patients start fighting back?
The immune response was pretty robust and relatively quick. Seroconversion, that's when you can detect antibodies in the blood.
Right.
That happened for 50% of the patients by day 7. And 100% of them had antibodies by day 14.
And how does that compare to the original SARS?
It's similar, maybe even a little bit faster.
So you'd think, okay, the antibodies show up, they flip a switch, and the virus gets wiped out, right?
That's the classic expectation. But the data here really challenged that. Seroconversion was not followed by some abrupt elimination of the virus.
So what happened instead?
Instead, the arrival of these neutralizing antibodies coincided with a slow but steady decline of the viral load, especially in the sputum.
So clearance was a process. It wasn't a single event.
Exactly. It was a gradual battle, not a sudden victory.
So if we have to summarize the single overarching public health revelation from this deep dive, it's really the biological reason why SARS-CoV-2 was so much harder to stop than SARS-CoV.
And the answer is all about efficiency and timing. SARS-CoV-2 is just vastly more efficient because that massive viral shedding happens when the patient's symptoms are still incredibly mild.
They feel like they just had the start of a common cold.
Or not even that. And yet they're walking, talking, interacting at their absolute peak infectious capacity.
Whereas with the first SARS, you were probably already in an isolation ward by the time you hit your much later, much lower viral peak.
That's the entire game. The early, high-titer replication in the throat is the biological engine for pre-symptomatic and oligosymptomatic spread. It's what powered the whole pandemic.
And this early study, even just with 9 mild cases, it gave us the first clear roadmap. It confirmed that simple throat swabs were a great tool early on, and it gave hospitals the first data to tell the difference between being PCR positive and being truly infectious.
It even offered a potential clue for the future. The authors noted that an increase in viral load after the end of that first week.
Which they saw in those 2 patients with some lung symptoms.
Right. They suggested that that late increase might be an early warning signal that a patient's symptoms were about to get worse.
So to recap the 3 most critical nuggets you now have from this deep dive. First, SARS-CoV-2 sets up a factory in the upper respiratory tract, the throat super early, leading to these massive viral loads that just powered transmission.
Second, that infectious window is actually pretty narrow. Live infectious virus could not be found after day 8, which gave us clear criteria for what real infectivity looks like versus just benign viral debris.
And third, the antibodies arrive pretty quickly, around day 7, but they don't just flip a switch and kill the virus. Instead, they kick off a slow, steady decline.
And that last point brings us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, which builds on the researchers' own conclusion.
Okay.
Given that the body's own natural antibody response leads to this slow, measured decline in the virus, what does that imply for vaccine design? Specifically, why must vaccine approaches aim to induce particularly strong, almost overwhelming antibody responses to be truly successful at not just preventing disease, but at halting transmission entirely?
It's a question that would demand an unprecedented global research response. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.